Good afternoon. I am Paula Fontana, Vice President of Strategic Programming Initiatives with the National Black MBA Association. Thank you so much for joining us for part one of Black Financial Empowerment with Equitable Advisors. So, the mission of the National Black MBA Association is to lead in the creation of educational, wealth building, and growth opportunities for Blacks throughout all stages of their careers as students, professionals, and entrepreneurs. So, building Black wealth. Empowering Blacks is the core of who we are. So, listen, let's get into this conversation. Black communities need fair and equitable access to financial resources and education to build truly sustainable, reliable generational wealth for Black families and communities. I am joined by representatives with Equitable Advisors who are here to address how we as Blacks can obtain financial empowerment through a holistic approach. So, first, with over 20 years of experience, Jacob Makoyo has leveraged strong aptitude in investments, life insurance products, financial planning tactics, and annuities knowledge to earn trust and guide clients in effective decision making in their financial future. He is a financial advisor and assistant branch manager in the Philadelphia branch of Equitable Advisors, Karr Barth Associates. Jacob is now more than ever committed to using his expertise to help bridge the racial wealth gap. Next up is Ryan Smith. He is an investment advisor representative and holds his designation as a certified financial planner with Equitable Advisors LLC in Pennsylvania. Ryan takes pride in breaking complex planning scenarios into smaller, manageable pieces to assist his clients in understanding how their investments, insurances, and tax legal obligations all play a part in their long-term financial situation. Ryan is committed to using his experience and expertise to making real impact to fight wealth equality and bridging the racial wealth gap for the Black community. Jacob and Ryan, welcome.
Thank you.
Of course. So, just to give a lay of the land of how our brief time together will go, so Equitable will share some of their research and data, which to help level set our conversation, and then we will jump right into our Q&A for the remainder of the time. So, for those of you watching, I encourage you to enter your questions in the chat as they come up, as they are presenting to maximize our time together. So, with that being said, Equitable, you have the virtual floor.
Ryan, you're on mute.
The fatal virtual meeting mistake. Thank you, Paula, and thank you, National Black MBA Association, for having us, and thank you, Equitable, for helping us to garner and really grow this partnership. And it's a vital part of our mission as we carry out the future of Black financial empowerment, to be in spaces where we can make sure that we're operating and walking in our mission and in our purpose. When Jake and I came together to really once again take this mission of racial equality and wealth equality and bridging the racial wealth gap, we were all kind of working through the mix of the George Floyd travesty, and really looking internally, saying, what can we do? How can we use our platforms and our levels of expertise to really be able to make a serious and long-term impact on our communities? And born out of that idea was the Black financial empowerment. And go to the next slide, Jake. And this is as we work through this mission. This is a quote that we lean on quite heavily. It says, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives." And we know that when we are having conversations with our clients and being able to assist them in all of the different works that we do, we know that we're having that lasting impact. And once again, in our platform, we want to make sure that we're operating in those spaces that has an impact in the communities that have not alternatively had those opportunities in the past. And we operate with this idea of let's, drive home the mission of maybe planting trees or planting those ideas or those generational endeavors that somebody else, a tree that somebody else may stand under, that we may not be there to be with them. So let's talk about wealth. We kind of going back to that idea of just wealth, the racial wealth gap, and we'll get into that in a second. But when we talk about how wealth is built, we look at wealth from a standpoint of how can we systematically take step after step to be able to get our clients and the people that we're working with to either the next level or whatever their next level is. And so when we think about wealth, we just think about some key points. One is consistency of saving, right? We know that if our clients and our the folks that we're talking to start as early as possible, and they from day one or day two, whatever day they start that journey, they start consistently putting money into assets, into savings vehicles, retirement, cash if need be, mutual funds, stocks, those different types of vehicles that will help them to build their asset column. We know that is one of the building blocks to creating that real wealth. Secondarily, when we really take a step back and look at what does wealth mean on a balance sheet, many of us know wealth is our assets minus our liabilities. So when we think about how can we build wealth, we need to build our assets, but we also need to reduce how much debt we're carrying, right? There's a lot of, student loans and all the other things that we have, but we want to identify why does it make sense and really even rates of return at some level. If we have debt, let's say a credit card that's at 20%, when we pay that off, instead of the company charging us 20%, we now have ultimately made a rate of return of that 20 at some level, right? And with that same idea, managing our own personal credit to make sure that we stay away from those higher percentage rates on the debt that we do carry is also a great advantage in the amount of wealth that we're able to generate. And that carries us right to the next idea of power of compounding. For many of us in our communities, we see the power of compounding a lot of times working against us in that debt pay down or paying the debt and reducing that debt. What we want to get is the power of compounding rolling for us. And we want that snowball effect to be snowballing for our wealth. So our dollars are working for our dollars. I always I use the analogy of I want to make sure my money's working as hard as I am. I go out and work 50, 60, sometimes 70 hours a week. I don't want my money sitting on the couch, eating a bag of potato chips and watching TV. I want it working and compounding for me every day, every month, and really growing and increasing my wealth. And also within that is inheritance. And we know that in some ways, inheritance is something that we may not be able to exactly control. What we're doing is kind of challenging that idea, right? In many of our in our communities, the topics of inheritances or just money in general may be taboo conversations. We're challenging that narrative and saying, hey, let's come together and start talking about this. Because we know when we talk about topics, when we talk about ideas, and when we come together as a family, we know we can have a drastic positive impact on those things. And we know that if we increase our inheritances as a community, it's going to alternatively increase our generational wealth. And lastly, that, kind of and just with informed decision making, and not just making informed decisions, but also writing down our plans once we have that information. So when we come together as a family, when we talk about growth and positive information, and then we start looking at those things together and jotting and plotting our course, we know that we're going to be better off and in a better place than we were, before that activity. And so once again, going back to the racial wealth gap, and when we talk about the racial wealth gap, really, this is what we're talking about. And we kind of let this sink in for a second or two. But in our society, the typical white family has nearly 10 times greater wealth than that of a Black family. And I don't know how you guys feel about that, but every time I see that line, that statement, that quote, it always hits a little bit of a nerve, because I know there's a lot that we can't control in that, right? There's obvious things that have happened in our history and in the years of policies and procedures that have hurt us in that respect. But we also know that we can be empowered, and that's where the Black financial empowerment is here to say, hey, we can do something about this, right? We understand that during economic downturns, the Black communities can be hit the worst. We understand that we're carrying more debt than our white counterparts. But once again, this idea of generational wealth, and that kind of this last quote that I'll end with and pass to Jay, because only 23% of folks in the Black community end up with more wealth than their parents. And I look at it the other way. Almost 80% of us don't end up with more wealth than our parents. And we believe strongly there are steps that we can take. There are plots that we can point, and we can really make an impact for our families and for our communities going forward. And I'll pass to Jake. He can dive a little deeper.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. And to that point, I think that's where we see the gap, and where specifically the gap that we see are these steps that we can implement into our own families and really work to close this gap. Even as something as simple as having life insurance. A recent survey of our community shows that 80% of us have this as a goal, but haven't executed on it, right? And so this is just such a simple. Insurance has never been less expensive. This is something that really would take. It's such a low hurdle for us to meet, but really just being intentional about it, and then also really thinking through how best to own it, right? Because at the end of the day, when we think about wealth in America, 60% of it is inherited. And so the reason why we're tying these two ideas together is, perhaps there are ways or strategies that our families should be talking about that can address this, right? Because here we are talking about wealth, not realizing that 2/3 of wealthy people are getting their wealth simply by being born into it. And so what are our families doing? What can we do? And then, of course, one of the unfortunate stats to be sharing with you today, if you don't already know, is that 8% of our community can even expect to receive an inheritance. And of course, all of that is born in a society that, has systemic challenges for us. Systemic racism has been at work here. But in 2021, there are a number of spaces we had been locked out of that we're no longer locked out of. And so the question is, how do we become intentional about that? And so at Equitable, we've been around since 1869, and our mission has always been to help our clients secure financial well-being, to live fulfilling lives. And we believe, leaving financial legacies for the generations that come after us is a part of that, living a fulfilling life, just like, in the earlier quote. So when we think about, why should we believe Equitable? We're proud to say that we're not all talk. In 1946, Equitable was one of the first corporate sponsors to be a part of the United Negro College Fund. In 1958, our president at Equitable wanted to integrate, wanted to have a diverse employee corps. And so it was one of the first ones to integrate corporate US-based companies. And so even when you fast forward to 2020, where our CEO made a hard turn into how do we advance racial equity, and so he created the task force to advance racial equity. And this is a product of that. These conversations, which we are looking to essentially continue to be a bastion of support for Black families. So we're not Johnny come lately, but we certainly are excited about some of the strategies that we can start to talk about, especially as we think about generational wealth. So in some of the research and work that we've been reading and understanding, house flipping, stock investments, entrepreneurship, these are common ideas that come up in our conversation with our community, in the Black community. What we don't realize, or what we don't really often take time to consider, is how some of these very popular ideas have more risk associated with them. And so then essentially we're advocating at Equitable having a much more holistic approach to looking at, okay, how do we make sure that we deliver on building a financial legacy, not just wealth for ourselves, but also generationally. And so in order to do that, it does require doing the basic blocking and tackling, doing the basic levels of financial planning, so that when we're not saying don't house flip or just go into individual stocks. We're saying, hey, have you done all the other parts of that? And so at Equitable, we're excited as a part of Black financial empowerment. We have these five components that sort of feed into the Black financial empowerment and what we see as huge opportunities for us as a community to get to implement within our families. Not least of which are the life insurance strategies that we'll be sharing on our next presentation. We'll actually bring out scenarios where you may or may not have thought about, and it's possible that your family might not be able to implement it, but you may know a family that would consider it. Again, this is sort of using the tools we have to be innovative, to build strategies on, essentially building more generational wealth for our family. Retirement readiness, it's, in fairness, it's not just our community that has some work in this space, retirement readiness, but why not make our community, sort of the, top producing, if you will, consistently more ready, right, than our peers. So we're saying, hey, that's a space that we can be in. Estate planning, business planning, what are some strategies that we can start to think about when we think about these categories that we can build on intergenerational wealth? And then finally, at Equitable, we're very much focused on, financial planning specifically for Black women. So these are some of the scenarios, some of the ideas that will be coming out of Equitable, but this is essentially the core of what Black financial empowerment is about at Equitable. And so equity is in our name. It's what we're about. And as I had shared with you earlier, we have a 160-year history of being about equity. And so, just a quick plug, when you're ready, we're here. If you want to screenshot this or reach out to us, please don't hesitate to do so. We're here. We are essentially a sounding board and a resource to anyone who's interested in, hey, what are some strategies and tactics that you can personally implement in your own situation. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paula. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share that deck.
Of course. Thank you so much for this valuable information. So questions are starting to fill in. I saw that with that last slide, you were able to answer one of the questions, which was, how do we get in touch with Jacob and Ryan? So hopefully you were able to screenshot that response. So the next question is about life insurance. What does your company see as the biggest obstacle for our communities in regards to life insurance?
Ryan, do you want to tackle that one first?
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in. The biggest challenge that I see, and this is kind of more widespread in my experience, is, I would say, waiting too late. That's probably the biggest challenge. So often we run into and even having a lot of these conversations and coming to the table with a lot of families over the last, I guess, year and a half now. We've met with a lot of families, not just individuals, a lot of families. And when they're looking to implement certain strategies, and we identify, okay, we want to do it, we have the means to do it, but these other challenges are in a way because we're either too old and it's too expensive, where our health gets in the way, and as we've aged and it's a little bit more expensive or unattainable. So I would say waiting too long is probably the biggest, one of the bigger challenges that we see. If you're able to, the earlier we're able to implement strategies and lock in those types of insurance plans, the better. Because many, and I'll give a little bit of a extra piece, many life insurance companies will allow you to convert even term policies to more permanent policies in the future. So if I lock it in when I'm in my 20s or 30s, even when I'm in my 40s or 50s, I still have the ability to keep my policy for a more extended period of time. So I would say not getting it early enough. Jake, not sure if you had anything to that.
Yeah, no, I would just piggyback on that. It's really not, the challenge really isn't with insurance companies anymore. Now, I mean, I can't tell you how many, great results I've had every time, when we apply as African Americans for insurance. It's no longer, and there was a time we were locked out of insurance. They kept us out of it systemically. But now more than ever, it's never been less expensive. So really it's on us. It's on our community to understand the value of it, understand how we can use it. And frankly, it really is an opportunity to sort of leverage your dollars, so in terms of being able to fill, especially that intergenerational inheritance component, that financial legacy component. When we think about how do we leverage dollars to do that, that's something we talk to our ultra high net worth clients about all the time. They're always looking for that way to do that. And so it's really on us, frankly. And then as financial professionals, we feel, especially African American financial professionals, we feel like it's definitely on our shoulders to make sure the message is out. Now's the time. Don't wait too late. Let's start these conversations today,
before you get a little bit older and then it's more expensive, right, to your point. So you mentioned this number, and it is truly mind-boggling. So the next question from our viewers is, why do whites have 10 times more wealth than African Americans? Why?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of reading and research on this particular question. There's quite a few components to that. Actually, there's a little bit of a debate in the literature. A lot of times you'll see some people will attribute it to the income disparities for people of color, just being locked out of jobs, being, even when we get into jobs, being locked out of the jobs, or, having sort of discrimination at the compensation level, just not being compensated, for every, dollar a white male is earning, how much are we earning? There's still a discrepancy there. So that's definitely playing a role. But the thing that especially Ryan and I have really pinpointed is this piece of generational wealth. As we noted in the presentation, 60% of wealth is inherited. And so the reality is we're just not inheriting. We inherit at a rate of 8 to 10% of us will inherit some kind of money, whether it's, house or, whatever it is, whatever that value is. And then when you dig deeper on that number, when you compare what we're receiving as an inheritance compared to our white counterparts, it's a fraction. So essentially what you see happening, particularly on the intergenerational wealth piece, that gift going from one generation to the next, because we aren't doing that, we continue to start from zero. Or like the Rolling Stone, or that oldies, it'll come to me, of course, when this is over. But there's that song where all he left us was alone.
Oh, Papa was a Rolling Stone.
Yeah, thank you. And unfortunately, it's funny, but it's not funny, because most of us, that's kind of what's happening. And actually, I was just recently watching an interview, great interview, with a couple of distinguished experts. And they were talking about, just like wealth rolls down in generation, poverty rolls down in generation. It gets left from generation to generation. So I think now more than ever is why I get so excited about it, because, as I think about, hey, if we start being intentional about leaving a financial legacy, we can make it different. But if we aren't being intentional about it, like Ryan's saying, well, we get to it too late when we start to think about it. So let's start now. And if I could be so bold, I would say, hey, we're the post-John Lewis generation. What are we going to do? What are we doing? And like Ryan alluded to earlier, what trees are you planting that someone else is going to sit under? Because that's how we make the difference. White families have been leaving legacies for decades, if not, centuries, right? And so that's what we're not doing. And part of that was systemic. We were locked out of it. Certainly in the prior century, we were locked out, and even into entering into this century, we've been locked out of it to a certain degree. But we have more tools now than the previous generations had. And so let's really explore what else can we do
to move the needle.
Yeah, make that impact.
Great. So we questions continue to roll in. So we thank you for that. We have only about 5 minutes left on this conversation, so want to get in a couple more if we possibly can. One quick question. We were talking about life insurance, that you need to get started early. Is there an ideal age that one should start thinking about getting life insurance?
Thinking about it, I would say now. Look at it now. Lock it in now. And once you have it, they can't take it from you typically. Most people have it through work, and they think, okay, I'm covered. But when you switch jobs, things could change. Your health could change. When you own it personally, typically those are contractual agreements that you can keep and also potentially extend in the future as well. And you'll find, I think the statistic is that most people estimate the cost of life insurance being about 200% more than what it actually costs. So it's usually fairly, inexpensive.
Yeah. Got it. Next question is, does one need to attempt to save money and pay off debt, or make one a priority over the other?
Let me take it. You got it.
Yeah. So I would say this is where, and it doesn't have to be us. Of course, we'd love it to be us, but really working with a financial advisor would be a huge opportunity here for you, because there are ways for you to save that can give you sort of a lower tax obligation at the end of the year, so you're paying less taxes and you're accumulating assets in one way. So all these things don't operate outside of each other. So the way that we do planning, we're looking at all of that. We're looking at, okay, what are your debt loads? Okay, what is your income? Okay, where can you save? And then we can start to think through, okay, well, even if you're going to try to accelerate your debt repayment, it still makes sense for you to save. So it's going to depend on your individual situation, and it's worth talking to someone about that.
Great. What I think maybe our last question is, does a client's account stay with the advisor or the firm, or if the advisor leaves the firm?
Sure. So an advisor, it's actually the advisor's account. It's the client's account. So that money belongs to the client. The client wants to move their money. They have the right to do that. So if an advisor leaves, they can't just take it without the client has to agree to transfer their assets over. So
excellent. So this has been amazing. I see that the chat continues to be excited, as I knew it would be, because we're all excited about this content. So again, there will be a part 2 to this series. And if you choose to reach out to Jacob or Ryan independently, then you saw that their contact information was listed earlier. So thank you again, Jacob and Ryan, and thank you to Equitable Advisors for this incredible, timely content for our members. So we again understand that there is so much more to unpack around Black financial empowerment. So I encourage you to stay tuned for part 2 of this incredible series coming soon. Until then, Your feedback is incredibly important to us. So you will see a link to click on a survey to give us your feedback. The first 25 people who will complete this survey will be entered in a chance to win an Amazon gift card. So do not delay. Again, thank you all for your time, for tuning in. Thank you again, Equitable Advisors, and I hope you have an incredible rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you, Paula.
Sure.